Hello, and welcome to our Working Wednesday webinar on resume building. Working Wednesday webinars are skill building webinars designed to help you as a student prepare for the working world. As a reminder, we have one more webinar after this one on interviewing skills. And for those students looking for a chance to practice these skills, we're holding workshops on the Thursday following the webinar for you to get one-on-one help via Zoom or in person at Spark Lab. And you can register for our webinars and our workshops at connectedlane.org, and you can click on the Elevate tab. So today for our webinar on resume building, we are joined by Holly Tate from the University of Oregon. Welcome, Holly.
Thanks for having me.
Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the work that you do?
Sure. So I am a job and internship developer at the Career Center at the University of Oregon, and I specifically help students find part-time jobs and internships in Eugene and Springfield. So I spend a lot of time working with local employers to help them understand the different types of needs of college students and what types of work they want to do, but it translates really well into high school students because your resumes look a lot similar to my college freshmen that I work with. So I'm happy to share some skills today and answer any questions you may have.
Great, and go ahead and feel free to get started when you're ready.
Okay, cool. So resumes are not fun. Like, let's just be honest. It feels like a legal document sometimes. Like it's just, you don't get excited to work on your resume. It's something that feels like a job and it feels like a hassle and something you have to do. But once you've done it once, it's a lot easier to do it again. And so if you start on one as a high school student, by the time you graduate college or go through a couple of jobs and have a lot more information to put on your resume, it'll feel a lot easier as you go throughout your career. I was thinking back about my first high school resume and the types of things that I thought were important to put on it. And gotta be honest, the only time I had to do one in high school was for a college scholarship application. And I think it was 12 pages long. No one told me that maybe your resume should be like a couple pages. And I just wrote down every single thing I'd ever done in high school. And it was exhausting. And I really wish somebody had told me how to do one a little bit better than I did back in high school. And so even as an adult now, my resume is only 1 or 2 pages. And even though I've got 10 years of experience to choose from. And so I learned a very good lesson that you don't have to put everything on your resume. But yeah, so let's just kind of start off with why do we even have resumes? Or why would you need one as a high school student? And so if you're thinking about applying for a part-time job in this summer, maybe you're applying for college scholarships, a resume might be something that an employer or a college might request to go along with your application. And so you might have a formal opportunity like that where you have to create one because they're asking you to, but it's also just really good to have on hand because you never know when there might be an opportunity you want to put your name in the hat for, and having your resume handy is going to be something that is just good to have on your computer ready to go. And so the one thing I just want to start off, and I will say this multiple times, you do not have to have paid experiences on your resume. There's still plenty of things that you have done as a middle schooler and a high school student that you can put on your resume. And it doesn't matter if you've ever been paid for it or not. These are still things that you can talk about on your resume to show a future employer or a college that you're a good candidate. And so don't feel limited if you've never had a job. The only jobs I had in high school was babysitting and tutoring and things like that I didn't have an employer. I was just kind of doing it myself. And so that's totally cool. You don't have to have a job that you go to be able to put it on your resume. And so we'll talk through some different types of things that we can put on our resumes that demonstrate those career readiness skills that employers and colleges are looking for in the people that they decide to hire or to give scholarships to. And so the other thing is that this document does not have to be fancy. You do not have to use fun colors. You don't need any pictures. You don't need 15 different fonts. And that's hard for me to say because I did graphic design in undergrad, and I love making things pretty. And so for the longest time, I wanted my resume to be beautiful and have all these colors and all these cool fonts. And I realized like that's not what people are looking for. Like people are looking for substance, and they want to see that you have the skills, and it's more about what you write and what you put on the paper than how pretty it looks. And so that was important to kind of know as you go into this. One of the questions I get asked by a lot of my students is, do I have to write a new resume for each job I apply to? And the answer is no-ish. So you kind of create a template as a resume, and for the most part, your resume is not going to change unless you get a new job or gain some new skills. But you can kind of use the same resume for 15 different jobs and just send them all out the same way. Your cover letter is what you end up personalizing to the job. And so that's where you end up putting in some of that more specialized stuff. And so as long as you have one good resume to start now, you can probably use it for a bunch of different things. And like I said, I know this can be a little scary document, and a lot of people wait until you have to have one or a reason to create it. And then that just creates a lot more stress on you too, because you might be working against a deadline and might not have as many people that can proofread it for you, or have the time to sit down and think about all the different types of things you've done in high school that you could write about. And so finding a time like now where it's kind of neutral and you don't really have anything that you're having to apply for by Friday, it allows you just an opportunity to sit and think about, what do I even want to go on this document? And so now's a great time to start drafting it. It's a living document. I definitely don't have the same resume I did when I was in high school. And I don't even have the same resume from the past 2 years since I've changed jobs. And so as you continue to go forward in your career and get different types of jobs, you'll decide what stuff is relevant to put on your resume. And you may decide, you know what? That thing I did back in high school, like, really doesn't matter anymore. And it's okay that I don't talk about that. Or even the thing you did the last job may not be relevant to the next job. So you get to decide what goes on this document. The important thing is you don't lie, like don't make things sound too much bigger than they actually are. Be really honest with yourself about your contributions to the job, and make sure that people understand that are reading it, what really happened in that job. And so if you only did a volunteer experience for an hour every week, don't make it sound like you did it 50 hours a week. So you gotta make sure you have realistic expectations for the people that are looking at it. The other thing to note is that no one has a perfect resume. I am very type A, and I love to make sure that everything is beautiful and that I don't have any typos. And sometimes that can keep me from starting at all because I'm so worried about things being perfect that I'm not even willing to try. And so one of those things I just want you to set aside, if you're a perfectionist too, is that this doesn't have to be perfect, and you can change it. And it's going to be a Word doc that you can edit as many times as you like, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And if you send it to somebody and you find a typo later, it's not the end of the world. I've done that so many times, and people are really forgiving. And so don't get so worked up on it looking perfect or making sure that all your dots line up and things like that. It's just more important that you start, period. And make sure that you're not doing it alone. Know that there are people in our community that want to help you, and are more than happy to, you can email your resume to them and they're happy to read it and give you feedback, your teachers, your parents. Even if you have someone in your class who's really good at English grammar, get them to proofread it for you. They may notice some stuff that you didn't notice. And so don't do things by yourself. So how does a resume look? So I created kind of a fake resume just to get us started, and we'll go through it later, just kind of breaking down all the different sections and what is important and what types of things to talk about. Just wanted to talk about some things that are required. So things that are always on a resume, regardless if you're a high school student or if you're a seasoned professional. The first is that you should always have a header with your contact information. And this we'll talk about in a second, but the major reason we do that is because we want to know whose information this is. And so if your name's not on it, we've got a problem. And so we also want to have good contact information because it's going to be such a good resume. They're going to want to call you and get an interview you for a job. The next thing you want to put on there is your education. And so because you're a current student, you can talk about your high school education and when you're going to graduate. And we can talk a little bit more about other types of things you can put in addition to your education. If you decide to go on to college, it's optional if you put your high school stuff on your resume or not. You get to decide when you think it's not relevant anymore. I think when I was a freshman and sophomore in college, I kept my high school stuff on there, but then once I had enough student leadership experiences and work experience in college, I started to let the high school stuff kind of fall away off my resume. And so, yeah, those are the two things that you always include. And then you get to kind of pick a combination of different things based on what you think is relevant to the job you're applying for and based on your past experience. So if you have work experience, you can totally put that on there, but you can also put volunteer experience, extracurriculars. You can put if you've gotten any special awards, if you have any special skills. There's all different kinds of things that you can put on your resume to reflect who you are as a future professional. And so you get to decide what you think is important. In terms of design and what a resume needs to look like, I say keep it simple, black and white, don't worry about colors, and keep it all in one font, just to make it simple and easy to read. Sometimes if people are just reading it on a screen and the text is too small, like they're going to give up really quickly because it's just too hard to read. And so I say like Times New Romans or one of those really basic fonts that's good for English papers. Do that in like a 12 font. And the biggest thing on your resume, font size wise, will probably be your name. And then you can kind of work with bolds and italics and bullet points and things like that to make it look more interesting. And so you want to make sure that it's easy to read. My rule of thumb, when I look at student resumes for the jobs I'm hiring for at the university, I want to be able to look over it in like 3 minutes or less. And so you have to think about if the person who's reading this gets 100 applications, what are the things that they're going to look at first? And so you kind of have to prioritize and make sure it's really obvious to them. What are the important things on your resume? And so if it's hard to read or it's not very well organized, they may miss something that was really important and really relevant that would have made you a good person to consider. And so a lot of resumes are in chronological order. And so the most recent thing is what you put up top in your work experience. So if you're doing something now or you just finished something, those are the things that you put first. But if that's not necessarily what's most relevant, so maybe your volunteer experience is more relevant than your part-time job at Starbucks. So you might actually move your volunteer experience above your Starbucks experience. And so you get to decide what order you want all these different components to be. Just know that it's really helpful when things are chronological because then people can see how long you did something and if you're still doing something. Yeah, and then the other stuff is just making sure that there's good spacing and it's not so much text. I've seen some resumes where the margins are so small because they had such long sentences they wanted to try to fit in there to tell me everything, but then it just makes it really hard to read. So just keep it simple. So let's get started kind of breaking down into the different components of a resume. So like we said, the heading is going to be where we start. This is the easiest part for sure. It's really hard to mess up your name and your email and things like that, but you got to make sure you type it out correctly. So make sure there's no typos here. And so if the bare minimum that you put in your heading is your name, an email address, and a phone number. And so In the past, people have said to put your address and things like that, but it's not really as important anymore. And so you don't really have to worry about that. And it takes up space. And so if someone wants to know your address for a background check or something like that, they'll ask you that as part of the job application, so you can put it there. The other thing is that as you're thinking about what you want your name to be on your resume, I know a lot of people don't necessarily go by their full legal name. So you might go by a middle name, or you might have a preferred name, or something else you like to go by. And so know that this isn't a legal document. And so if you have a preferred name that you'd rather them call you, you can feel free to put, like I said here, a lot of people, if they go by their middle name, may say your first name with your initial and then Micah, or if you want to say it in parentheses. So my sister, her name is Rebecca, but she goes by Becky. And so on her resume, it says Rebecca Becky, and then our last name. And so that way, when she goes into the interview, everyone knows, oh, she's going to want to be called Becky. If we call her Rebecca, it's going to feel really awkward to her. And so just know that that's something you can do. If you go by a nickname and it's not the most professional nickname, maybe go by your real name. So, but if you have a preferred name that you want people to call you by, you can totally put that on your resume. The other thing is with your phone number, make sure that you have a voicemail set up. I know a lot of us don't ever listen to voicemails anymore, but someone might want to call to offer you an interview. And if you're sitting in class or something like that, or at your sports team, they need to be able to leave a message. And I know some employers do text as well, but most likely you'll probably get a voicemail. And so make sure whatever your voicemail is something that says your name and is pretty professional. And so you might want to go and change it if you have one that's a little more fun, just while you're job searching, just to make sure that it is professional. And the other thing is that while you're job searching, make sure to actually don't screen your calls. And so I know a lot of us don't pick up for numbers that we don't know. If you're throwing your resume out there and trying to apply for jobs, one of those numbers may be trying to give you a job. So now's the time to pick up the phone. So know that this might be someone calling you to try to offer you a job. I know with a lot of, right now, there's so many jobs available in Eugene that you might apply for 4 or 5 jobs and get offered one really quickly. And then a week later, someone calls you to offer you a spot to interview again, and you've already got a job. And so our default might be, oh, well, I'm just not going to reply to them because I've already taken care of it. I've already got a job. But a best practice would be to call them back and tell them, hey, I'm no longer interested in this position. I've already found something else. Thank you so much for calling me and offering me anyways, because you never know, a couple of years down the line, you may want to work there again and they'll remember that you ghosted them. And so every opportunity that you have to interact with an employer, you never know when it might come back around. And so make sure that you have a positive experience with every employer that you get a chance to interact with. And so no ghosting, friends. With your email address, make sure you have a professional email set up that is some version of your name or something, what we would call like professional. So I even gave my example from high school. I was a drum major, and so mine was WM Drum Major 05. And that was fine for my friends, and it was easy. It was fun for me. I also had all that bad capitalization too. That was a thing in the early 2000s. So it was really bad. So when I went to college and stuff, I made sure to change my emails to just my first and like dot or slash my last name, and make sure to check the email. So if that's not your default email you look at all the time, make sure that you're checking it. But I have seen some really wild email addresses on student applications before, and sometimes it tells me a lot about their personalities, but sometimes it doesn't necessarily help their case for hiring them. So it's just good to be neutral as in any time that you can. Okay, so something that I sometimes see on high school resumes and college resumes is this idea of a objective or a summary statement. And a lot of times if you're not doing a cover letter along with your resume, this could be a great way if you have a resume that has a lot of random experiences and you think that the employer may not understand why you're applying for this job. So maybe you've been a pet sitter and you've been a barista, but now all of a sudden you want to go work. You want to go work at, I don't know, a sporting goods store or something, and there's nothing on your resume that says that you want to work at that you ever done anything in sporting goods or that you even like sports. And so this could be an opportunity for you to tell them a little bit more about yourself and why you're interested in this specific opportunity. So it's kind of like a mini cover letter, but it's never more than like 1 or 2 sentences. And if it makes if you don't feel like it helps your resume, then don't put it on there. This is something that changes with every single job. And so if you are going to forget to change it, or you don't really understand, you don't really know how it relates to the job, maybe just leave it off. But I want you to know that that's a thing. And so when you look at templates, if you Google templates for resumes and stuff, you might see this as something people put out there, but it's not required. But these are some of the go-tos of things. So we already talked about education being something that we always put on there. Usually you put the name of your school and the city and state it's in, and then you can either put your classification or your year of graduation. And then GPA is always optional. If you have a really good GPA and you're very proud of it and you want people to know that you have a 4.0 or whatever you're really proud of, go ahead and put it on there. It can be really impressive to people. But if you're like, it's not really like, that's not where I shine in school, just leave it off. It's not worth it. So that's totally optional. And then you can also put if there's been any classes that you've taken in school that you think are relevant to the job you're applying for. So if you're applying to be if you're applying to do something at a photography studio and you've taken 3 photography courses, put that you've taken those classes. That can kind of help them understand, oh, they already have experience in this kind of stuff. The other thing is if you're taking CTE classes, this can be a great place to talk about those types of experiences as well, because a lot of people look really highly on the different CTE programs that we have in Lane County. So that could be a great place for you to talk about some of your skills there. And so I just kind of wrote up a little sample of what that might look like. The other thing you can put is if you've ever gotten any awards that you want to talk about. So maybe you made the honor roll, or maybe you have something special that you want to talk about. That's a great place to put that information. So if you have had a part-time job and you want to talk about it on your resume, there's a couple different ways that you can do this. So if you my rule of thumb is that if you're going to use bullet points, you have to have at least 2 points. So 1 bullet point is not a list. It's got to have 2 to at least be a list. So try to think of 2 different things you can talk about at a minimum. And when you talk about these things, you want to use action verbs to start the sentence. And so this is a way to show that to demonstrate what you did. And employers really like seeing that the action that you use to be able to do the different types of things that you've done. And so the other thing is to think about impact. And so if you did something that impacted a lot of people, or you did something on a large scale, talk about that. It's really impressive to know that, oh my gosh, like they helped 100 people, or whatever it was to be impressive. So think about different ways you can talk about that stuff. The other thing is that you want to be able to demonstrate different skills. And so sometimes it's more important to try to show how you're demonstrating skills than the actual tasks you did. I think a lot of times students will just essentially take their job description and put it on their resume, and that's just really boring. And so it's great that you answered the phone, but like, tell me about like what you learned by answering the phone, or what you learned customer service skills because you had to learn how to talk professionally to strangers and things like that. So it's more important to talk about what you learned versus what you did. And then if you're not doing the job anymore, use past tense. And so that's really helpful as you're looking at someone's resume to know if they're done with the job, that you start seeing past tense of everything. And so I just put up 2 examples. One is an example of if you're a lifeguard, here might be some things that you had done as a lifeguard. We use action verbs. We talk about some numbers, talk about teamwork, talk about some specialized skills. And then the other option is something that the student would have done without any kind of employer. It was just something they did on their own time to make money. So you might have been a pet sitter, and these might have been some of the things that you did while you're pet sitting. And so if you don't have an actual employer, still put it on there. It's a great way to demonstrate different skills. The pet sitter example shows that you were kind of entrepreneurial, and you kind of started your own business. And so that's something that's really interesting to employers as well. So what's probably going to be more likely on most high school students is the idea of putting your volunteer work on your resume. And so if it was a great experience for you, put it on your resume. And it's just important how you frame it. And so if you've been helping out with your church's daycare for the past however many years, you can talk about that as a volunteer experience. Or maybe you were you're in a club and you're in a leadership role now. You can talk about how you what you do in that leadership role. And so these are all things that you can put on your resume. I have more examples of resume volunteering. And so, for example, maybe you tutored a couple of your friends for the SAT. You can talk about what it was like to be a tutor. And it doesn't matter if this isn't like a real job title, like you can kind of make up your own job title for stuff when it comes to volunteering. And so the one I like about this is that maybe you did some extra stuff that for example, maybe you took an extra course to be able to help be a better tutor. Maybe you did a whole bunch of research so that you could do better at your job. And those are all important things that you can talk about on your resume that make it, that demonstrate professional skills. And then we already kind of talked about coursework. The other thing that I've seen students put on there is experiential education. So you may have a hobby that is connected to what you want to do in this next job. So maybe you really like hiking and you want to go work at an outdoor school like Nearby Nature for the summer. And so you want to figure out a way to talk about something that's not really it's never been a job. It's just something you're really good at and you really enjoy. And so there's totally ways to talk about on your resume as well. So you can talk about how you know how to identify wildflowers, because that might be something that's helpful. And you can also talk about sports and band and theater and choir, anything that you did extracurricularly that you think might be helpful for them to understand more about who you are as a person and the types of things you enjoy doing. Those are totally things you can put on your resume. And so the other section of resume is called, and this is, I go back and forth. Sometimes it's optional, but I think it's becoming a little bit more common, is this idea of just putting a list of like the skills that you're really good at. And so these might be things that haven't shown up in your job descriptions and things like that already on your resume, but you want to make sure that they understand that you are a conversational Spanish speaker. And there's nothing about the jobs that you've done before that would tell them you did Spanish, but you think it's really important that they know that about you. Or you want to talk about that you're a really good typer. There's little quizzes you can take online. You can do typing quiz and it'll tell you how fast you can type. And so if you are a really good typer who doesn't mess up a lot, that could be a really good if you're applying for a job that has a lot of administrative skills. And so that could be a great way to demonstrate that you're really good at that skill set. And so those are kind of hard skills. Those are things that you've learned and you've developed. But then there's also soft skills, which are more things associated with your personality or who you are as a professional. And so you can also talk about those types of things. So if you really enjoy teamwork or you think that you have a really positive attitude, those are things you can talk about as well on your resume. And then we already kind of talked about action verbs as a way to talk about on your resume, make sure that you're using those types of words. I think our defaults tend to be words like worked, helped, responsible for, and assisted. And those don't really tell us anything about what you did. They're kind of filler words. And so instead of saying worked, try to think about words like described or communicated. There's a whole list of ones that you can find, but try to find more cool words to talk about what you did instead of just saying, I was responsible for training. Say you trained somebody. And so that's probably the hardest thing about resumes is your defaults tend to be worked, helped, responsible for. And the other thing is to try to use different words. And so if you do come up with a cool word, try to not use it 3 times in a row. So try to get out your thesaurus and try to find other words to demonstrate what you've been up to. And the more you can use these strong action words, the more it grabs the attention of the people that are reading it, and the more they can understand about the types of skills you have. And so, and I'll make sure you have a copy of this list for later if you need it as reference. And then of course, before you hit send or print, you're going to want to save it as a PDF, knowing that PDFs, once they're sent to somebody else, it keeps the formatting and things like that. So it makes sure that it looks the exact same way you wanted it to look. Sometimes people's computers mess stuff up if you send it as a Word doc. And so we want to make sure it looks exactly how you wanted it to look. Make sure that you proofread it, so make sure you don't have any typos. Like I said, look for, and then just stopped. So I did that on purpose to see if I proofread or not. Yeah, and make sure it looks like you want it to look. And then the good rule of thumb is to always leave yourself plenty of time for someone else to review it as well. I can look at my resume all day long and your eyes just get tired and you may not notice a glaring typo or something, but it's nice to have those fresh eyes. And so parents and friends and teachers are always good to help with that. And then the other thing, when you're saving it as a PDF, make sure that your name is in the document title, because a lot of times if you're submitting things virtually, if it just says resume, they may have gotten 20 resumes. And so it makes it hard for them to know which one was yours. And do I have enough time for a little practice? I don't know where I am on time.
I think it would be helpful if you did,
Okay,
just to give some examples.
yeah. So I create a fake internship for Richardson Sports. I'm sure they would love this internship. But let's say you wanted to do an internship this summer and there was this customer service internship at Richardson Sports, which is a company in Springfield. And so you're reading the job description and these were some of the things that pop out to you. So you notice that they talked a lot about customer service because it's literally in the title. They talk about you doing some data entry as part of the job. And then they also talk about how this person would probably use Microsoft Office as part of the job. And so they also ask about some soft skills just in the way they describe the position. They say they're looking for someone who's fun and energetic, that has written and verbal communication skills and enjoys working with people. And so when you read the job description, you're kind of learning what they want to see on your resume. And so this is called tailoring. And so you may have a resume ready to go, but because of the way the job description is written, you may have said that instead of using the word data entry, you may have just said computer skills. And so you may want to go back and change your resume to say data entry instead, just because you know those are some of the keywords in their head that they're looking for. And so there are some ways that you can edit your resume as you look at a job description. So, and sometimes you'll see stuff and you're like, I don't know if I have data entry skills, but I think I could do it. And so, for example, like data entry is keeping notes for class. I used to take my notes and then I would type them afterwards. So because I have horrible handwriting and I knew I'd forget what I wrote after class. Or maybe you're a fast typer and you don't make a lot of mistakes. So those are data entry skills. You may be learning a lot about Excel right now. And so if you want to talk about the fact you've been learning Microsoft Excel, and then a lot of like the Microsoft products or Google products, you've been using those in a virtual classroom and real classrooms the past couple of years. And so you can use those skill sets to talk about, yeah, I had to use Microsoft Word to type my English papers, or I've had to use Microsoft Outlook to be able to communicate with my teachers over email the past couple of years. And so I think there's ways that you can integrate stuff that maybe you haven't done in a job, but you've done them in class as well that you can talk about. So if this was our resume, we're trying to think about if the person at Richardson Sports, based on our resume, would they think we're a good candidate for this job? So we know that they're going to be looking for customer service skills. So based on my resume, I talk about some volunteer experience where I was an information desk assistant. And a lot of the things in that category are similar to customer service skills. And so I can kind of put like a mental check mark that, okay, I've got at least one good example on my resume of customer service skills. I also put customer service skills in my skills list, so they'll probably see it there too. When it comes to data entry, I put that I know Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, so that's kind of close. I put that I had good typing skills. That's a little closer to data entry. And then, I don't know, I think I could probably go back into my resume and add something to make the data entry one a little bit stronger. And so, so that's good for me to know that maybe I'm not the best candidate on paper yet for that. And I can go back and say, okay, well, maybe when I was a pet sitter, I kept up with an Excel document of all of my clients. And when I was scheduled to go take care of their dogs, and I kept up with like when they paid me, maybe there's things that I could put into the stuff about pet sitting that represents my data entry skills. When it comes to soft skills, they said they were looking for someone who loves sports, was a good communicator, and had a positive attitude. And so I have mentioned twice that I was MVP. I don't play softball. I was MVP on the South Eugene varsity softball team. And then I talked down at the bottom about what it meant for me to be a softball player. And so I think it demonstrates pretty well that I like sports. With good communicator, I put that I have public speaking skills. So that's another way to talk about being a good communicator. Also under my volunteer experience, I talk about greeting patients and things like that. So that could demonstrate that I also have those skill sets. And then positive attitude. I don't know if I necessarily have gotten into that one. So maybe I want to figure out a way, how do I demonstrate my positive attitude on my resume? And so maybe I decide I want to put it in the skills section, or maybe I want to figure out a way to integrate it into the childcare provider one, because I only have one bullet point for that. And I said I would always do 2 bullet points. So yeah, so there's ways that you can always use the job description to help you know what they're going to be looking for. And so as someone who hires people, I usually have the job description as I'm reading resumes, and I'm looking for those matching. And so as I see someone and I'm like, oh, they've checked off my top 5 things, they go in the pile of people I call. And so that's just kind of an easy way as you're thinking about how do you edit your resume for a particular type of job. I think that's it. And then I'll make sure I've got some sample templates and things like that, the list of action verbs, and then lists of skills and things like that, that you can have access to after today. So yeah, that's the beginnings, the basics.
Great, thank you, Holly. That was fantastic how you broke it all down piece by piece. It makes it feel much more manageable. Instead of approaching the whole thing all at once, you have the different categories that students can focus on. Can you talk a little bit more about how many pages a resume should be? If you're a high school student, you're approaching some entry-level positions. We have a hiring fair coming up in April. So we have quite a few high school students who are really thinking about resumes right now. And like you said, you did a 12-page resume, which I love that idea. How many do you think, how many pages should students try to get to? Is there like a goal number, or is it a little bit flexible?
I definitely think it's flexible. I think the goal should always be 1 page. Even as a professional who has 15 years of experience, I still try to only write a 1-page resume. And so one of the things that I do is I have one document and I call it my master resume. And it has everything I have ever done in my professional or personal life that I think one day might be good to have on my resume. And it's like 12 pages long, and it's got everything, because I know that a couple of years from now, I'm going to forget what I volunteered back in 2022. And so I try to just once a year go in and kind of do some edits and just add stuff so I don't forget about it. And so when I apply for a job, I go through and say, okay, based on this job description, what do I think is going to be most relevant to this position. And
Mhm.
so maybe I volunteered with a certain organization, but it doesn't have any relationship to what I'm applying for now, but I have some better examples. So I'm going to want to use the better examples. And so I think the goal is always to try to fit it on like one, maybe 2 pages. If you have a lot of extracurricular activities and things like that, I think that could be justification for doing 2 pages. I think it's just important to figure out what do you think is most important. If someone's only going to dedicate 3 minutes to reading it, you want to make sure that the most important stuff is on the first page. If they don't ever make it to page 2, that they don't miss out on something. But a lot of jobs will also make you fill out an application along with your resume. And so that might be a place where you can write stuff more chronologically if you don't put everything on your resume.
Okay, great. For those people watching currently, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. This will be my last question. So this is kind of a last call for questions. So Holly, since people are only looking at these resumes, like maybe 3 minutes, if you have like 100 resumes for one position, you don't have a ton of time to look at each resume. What would you say are your top 3 tips for making a great first impression on paper?
Yeah, I think having someone that you can tell that they took their time to create something. So that means that I look at it and there's consistent formatting. And so everything looks the same. There aren't any typos, that things are spelled correctly, and that I can tell that they have tailored it for the job. So when they talk about their skills, they're talking about skills that are relevant to the type of work we do. And so if someone, for example, maybe it's a job that has a lot of computer skills that you need to know, and they don't talk about computer skills at all, then I'm like, well, they may have them, but they haven't demonstrated that to me. And so if this is the only thing I see about them, do I have a full picture to be able to call them and feel like they can be good in that first interview? And I think that sometimes, like, especially with like high school resumes and stuff like that, like if you create your resume and you're like, man, like I don't really think there's enough here, that's a good opportunity for you to sit down and think like, okay, well, what's missing? Like, okay, you know what, I'd really like to talk about my volunteer opportunities, but I've never volunteered. Or I'd really like to talk about my extracurricular activities, but I don't have any. And so that's an opportunity to do some self-assessment, to say, you know what, like I can join something tomorrow. And so I think about where are some of those gaps in your own personal development or your own professional development. And maybe it's you keep seeing job descriptions for like graphic design internships and you're like, you know what, those look super fun. But every time I see one of them, they say I need to know how to use this particular software. And I've never done anything with that software. I can start watching YouTube videos about that software, and I can download the software and I can start playing and start to develop some of the skills so that when I put it on my resume that I know how to use that program. If they ask me to do it, I kind of know what I'm doing. And so that's pretty helpful too. I don't know if that was really a 1, 2, 3, but
very helpful tips altogether. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for presenting all that information in such a clear fashion. And thank you everyone for joining us for this Working Wednesday webinar on resume building. We hope you learned a lot. And remember to head to connectedlane.org to register for future webinars and other opportunities. And we will see you next time.